What a way to end the year as Kansas State upsets Cincinnati in the Big 12 opener.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. We have an exciting one to finish up the year, finish up 2024 on a good note, and start Big 12 play exactly the way we were hoping. Kansas State defeats Cincinnati, number 16 ranked Cincinnati in the Big 12 opener, 70-67, and everything just looked what we expected to see from this Kansas State Wildcats basketball team all season long. It puts the doom and the gloom of that non-conference schedule far in the distance in my mind. It's still there, obviously, on the records. Don't get me wrong. There's no doubt about that. It's going to linger on as hopefully this team can become a potential bubble team, or maybe even better than that, on the cusp of what we just saw tonight. But it is exactly what you would like to see from this Kansas State team. And we got to talk about the exciting play from Dug McDaniel, how Coleman Hawkins has changed the way he's playing now. It sounds like we're going to get a lot more scoring from him. Might not be a facilitator aspect. And that role seemed to be kind of shifted a little bit. And we're going to talk about in this show. We're going to talk about some interesting comments by Coach Tang. And then we're going to wrap this up to say, is this even feasible? Can we continue this role? Is this something that we can see Kansas State maybe running with? This is a team that maybe we were talking about, will they win at least one Big 12 game? Now that we've seen a team that has 40 minutes of Kansas State basketball that we've hoped to see all season long, and they did it in conference play, maybe this team can make a run. And I want to talk about that as we wrap up the year and this show. But first, before we get into that, I have to shout out you guys. You have been fantastic. And I was just talking on the show yesterday how we reached 200 subscribers. We are just I think a few subscribers away, last time I checked, from 300 in just one day's time. I don't know if it was the call out that I gave you guys or it just whatever it was, but thank you so much for joining this adventure with me of Locked On Kansas State. I am so excited to have you on board, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic 2025. We're going to have a great 2025 episode tomorrow to break in the new year for why you should be excited for Kansas State athletics. And I think you just got a taste because the men's basketball team put on a show against Cincinnati. Dug McDaniel had the coming out game. This is the game that we were hoping for from Dug McDaniel all season long. Coming over from Michigan, we needed a true point guard. We finally saw probably the best point guard play for Kansas State all season long. It happened last night against Cincinnati. He played 33 minutes. This is coming after only playing like 5 minutes, I believe, his last game. He hardly played in the last game of the non-conference schedule. 17 points. He did have 6 turnovers. We're going to talk about that, but 2 assists, 2 rebounds, 17 points, 7 for 13 for the field. And listen to this, 2 for 3 from the free throw line. This squad was 80% from the free throws. That is something not to bat an eye against. After being about a 50% free throw team in non-conference play, heading in, proving a message against a ranked opponent, Cincinnati. And in the eyes of Coach Tang, said they're one of the most underrated ranked opponents. The number by their name is too low, according to our coach. Well, we just beat them by 3. So really impressive by this entire team. But I love what I saw from Dug McDaniel. And we're going to dig into some comments about what Coach said about Dug McDaniel, because there's a polarizing relationship between those two. And we kind of got a little bit behind the scenes in the post-game conference. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But I really enjoyed watching Dug McDaniel play basketball today. He had such a high motor. He performed really good. He moved the basketball. He was fast. He made the defenders have a very hard time guarding him, and he drove the basket. I think that was the biggest thing that I love to see. If you've listened to some of my past shows talking about the basketball team, one of my biggest gripes with the squad during non-conference games was their shot selections. I thought that was the biggest head scratcher to me, is that we had a team, and we just saw it in the game against Cincinnati, that you were able to drive the lane and be aggressive. Well, we saw that against the game of Cincinnati, but we did not see that in non-conference play. They were wasting down to the bottom of the shot clock and taking low percentage shots with 2 or 1 or the buzzer beaters of the shot clocks. We didn't see that in this Big 12 opener. It was very aggressive. They were shooting very early, finding a way to get second chance points. Yes, they did lose the rebounding game, but it was enough to stick in battle with Cincinnati. They are taking great shots, high percentage shots in early in the shot clock. They controlled the pace, and that was about moving forward as we get into Big 12 play. They do have to go on the road. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Dug McDaniel, he deserves all the flowers. He is the MVP of the game against Cincinnati and of the Big 12 opener. I hope we see more from him. I hope we see more starting from him, and I hope this lit the fire that we need from Dug McDaniel. Coach Tang talked about during that 10-day break about that buy-in. I hope this is the buy-in that Dug McDaniel needed. Seeing this team for the first time in the form that we all expected to see. Now that we finally get to see it, I hope players like Dug McDaniel see that buy-in and can push forward and carry this momentum heading into the rest of Big 12 play. Coleman Hawkins was another really impressive player on the court on Monday night. I thought he was fantastic, and not in the way you'd expect. Now, obviously, the broadcasters love to talk about how Coleman Hawkins is just a guy who stuffs the stat sheet. That's like their favorite line. If you ever listen to the broadcast, because he fills every stat sheet with rebounds, assists, points, you name it. He's not somebody that's going to overexcite you with one of those stat categories, but he's going to make sure everybody, gets fed. And that's just the way that he plays. It's just his type of play character, and it works. It's very good. However, it sounds like his role is beginning to change. And not only does it sound, it looked like it in the game in the Big 12 opener. Coleman Hawkins did finish with 20 points in the game, 10 rebounds. He had 4 steals, 3 assists. And although he didn't have a block, I felt like he had one. He must have not had that count for him. Somebody else must have got it on the stat sheet, or maybe there was a tip, whatever the case. I thought he had one in the game, but the stats didn't call for it. Overall, he shot 7 for 13, just like Dug, from the field goal, from all across the court, 3 for 5 from beyond the arc, and 3 for 4 from the charity strike. Love that. I'm more excited about the 75% from Coleman Hawkins from the charity strike than I am for him shooting 3 for 5 from the 3-point line, because Coleman Hawkins is a guy that can be aggressive and get to that charity strike, get to that 3-throw line more often and shoot more than 4 heading into this conference play. And I think we're about to see that. It sounds like he is going to be more aggressive in the scoring category. We're going to see him probably facilitate a little less. Doesn't mean he's not going to. I still think he's going to get his assist. 3 assists might be around his threshold. Might see maybe like 4 or 5. But I think if we get 20 points and 3 to 5 assists, I'll take that all day, especially in the toughest basketball conference in all of college basketball with the Big 12. No doubt about that. But he played fantastic, 36 minutes. We saw a lot of the starters get some really big minutes this one, and that's why we saw that, for the most part, diminished in non-conference play. You knew this was going to happen. They got to play these starters a lot of minutes, 35 minutes plus. We saw it from Hawkins and Gasson getting 36 minutes. You're going to need that going into this tough stretch of schedule and hopefully getting back into the NCAA tournament. I got lots to talk about for this game. We're going to dig into it. I want to get to Coach Tang's comments as well. But first, let's take a break right here on Locked On Kansas State. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them down. It's like having a personal assistant for all your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and help lower your bills that can grow your spending. It brings everything together in one place. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features was the subscription tracker. As I mentioned, I had 2 different subscriptions I didn't know was, and I used to cancel the services I wasn't using anymore. And I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. 2025 is coming up. I got some great saving plans ahead, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for Rocket Money. You can cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goal faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. We're talking about these Kansas State Wildcats men's basketball team as they've defeated the Cincinnati Bearcats 70-67 in the Big 12 opener. I didn't see it coming. I'm not even going to lie. I didn't see it coming. I was not expecting their first win in conference to be the Big 12 opener, to be against the ranked opponent. I just wasn't expecting it. Doesn't mean I'm not excited. I'm actually more excited probably knowing that it happened, because we finally saw a team that can play 40 minutes of solid basketball, move the NIL stuff aside, move the money aside, any of that stuff that we've talked about in the past. If they finally can play the basketball, the rest of those narratives don't matter. And that's the biggest issue here. That's the biggest conversation that us as fans should be talking about. If they're playing great basketball, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. And we finally got to see that on Monday night. Coach Tang put out some really interesting comments during the post-game conference. And I think the biggest ones we got to get to is what he said about Dug McDaniel. And I thought it was really interesting. He said that he had no intentions of actually starting Dug McDaniel in the game. There was a conversation, about him moving on and off the bench. Of course, in his last game, he only played about 5 minutes. But Coach Tang said he had no intentions of starting Dug McDaniel. He said he didn't like his body language and walkthroughs. And then one of his assistant coaches came up to him and stated, well, maybe you should just start him. It's obviously what he wants. Give him a chance and start him. And Coach Tang was very honest at the presser, stating that he didn't think he deserved it. And he called it undeserved privilege in this case. And he did quote a couple Bible verses and talked about his whole process. But what he said was undeserved privilege. And he said he didn't feel like he deserved to get the starting job for the Big 12 opener. He said he took a step back and checked his ego and then decided to give that start to Dug and hoped that it was going to give him maybe more of that little buy-in that we talked about in that first segment. And I think that did the job. He played with some great energy. Whatever the body language that happened in walkthrough, I'm doubting that's what they saw in the game, because he played lights out. He had a high motor, and I think his energy, his momentum excelled everyone else around him. You finally got to see some true point guard play for Kansas State this season. I don't think we've seen that all year long. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's been one of the biggest issues for Kansas State so far this year. And we got to see the point guard play finally step up. They also talked about how the coaching staff simplified things and talked about how they, in my mind, I think that has something to do with that shot selection. I kind of mentioned it earlier, how my biggest gripe is how they have made low percentage shots because they're trying to move the ball around and they're taking too much time during possessions. In my mind, at least what I want to hope it be, is that the simplifying of things is being more aggressive, taking shots more early when they just see an opening, and then attack the rim, hope for second chance points. Even though they lose the rebounding battle, they still win the game. That's where I am guessing where that simplified approach is. He didn't go into detail what he meant by that. And of course, I don't think he would, because that is kind of giving away your game plan. And when we're talking Big 12, we don't need any other teams in this conference to take any more extra advantages they need against this Kansas State team. But that's where my mind goes when he says simplified things. the shot selections. The transition defense was really good. I thought that was great. Now, they did have 11 turnovers in the game. You can always clean up more turnovers, but 11 turnovers is a lot less than 15, 16, 17 that we've seen in the past over this last couple weeks in non-conference play. Coleman Hawkins, of course, was mentioned during the post-game conference by Coach Tang, saying that he is just the glue of this team. And he kind of mentioned how his role is going to change, how they stated that he can no longer be that guy that wants to feed everyone and be that type of player. They talked about how they need him to be the scorer, to be a scorer. And I'm pretty sure he said they meant the scorer, the primary guy for this offense. And it looked like it worked really well. If this is the team, this is the type of roles that we're starting to see, by the way, starting to fit in. It took us 11 games to get there, but it sounds like we're finally at that aspect. If this is the style that we're going to see, how can you not be excited for the rest of Big 12 play? Can you put aside the non-conference woes after watching a game like that? After watching 40 minutes of, I don't want to say near perfect basketball, but the best Kansas State basketball that we've seen in at least this year, and you probably could go back to last season a little bit as well. That was one of the best games I've seen in quite some time for the Wildcats, without question. They stressed with Coleman the last few days that they need him to be a scorer. That's why he was more aggressive, and it worked out. You saw McDaniel step up. You saw Hawkins step up. Gasson seemed to be kind of taking a little bit more of that role from Hawkins, and I think that worked out well for him. He struggled towards the end of the non-conference play as well. He stepped up pretty well, pretty big time in this one. He ended up with 13 points and 7 rebounds, and he had 1 block and a steal as well. Of course, I think one of the biggest moments in the entire game was from Gasson in a late and one. If all 3 of those players, with McDaniel, Hawkins, and Gasson, I think you just want to say get remotely close to 15 points. Let's just call it over 10 for the sake. And they're limiting their turnovers. I think just those 2 things alone, and you can get that from all 3 of those players, I think you have a really good chance at beating nearly every team in this conference just from that aspect alone. Now, there's going to be a couple other teams in this conference that are going to need a lot more than that, and it's going to require every single player, all 9 players that stepped on the court for Kansas State in yesterday's matchup. But I do think that just those 3 can be a huge factor, especially in the next couple games coming into the Big 12 play. This is a fantastic game. This was a really exciting game. But do we relax? Do we step forward? What happens? Because if you relax in the Big 12 conference, here comes another ranked team. This is the toughest conference in college basketball. So with that being said, what should we expect, and should we expect this type of play moving forward? What does this win mean for the rest of the Big 12 conference schedule? And we'll really focus on the next couple games moving forward. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. And let's wrap up this segment and wrap up the year. This is the final segment of 2024 here on Locked On Kansas State. Again, thank you so much for listening. If you're looking for something else to finish off your year, maybe you need a nightcap before you hit first night, check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll's killing it over there. He's doing a fantastic job. And if you want to get a little bit more ideas of what some of these other teams across the conference are doing, Drake Toll has you covered. There was another really big conference game right after the game. If you didn't stick around and watch it on CBS Sports Network, Iowa State and Colorado took place. Drake's got you covered over there. So check them out for your second listen of the day. So what can still be done, right? I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what the Big 12 conference, what we have looking forward, what's in store for this team. Can it be sustainable? Is this a type of play that we should expect moving forward from this squad? And if so, was this perfect basketball? I'm going to stop you right there and say no. I think there's still a couple things that can be improved. And although it was the best 40 minutes that we've seen all season long, I think there's still ways that you can improve, and that's a good thing moving forward for this squad. So let's first start off with what we have next for Kansas State. Well, luckily, And I say this with a tongue-in-cheek kind of style. They have TCU on the schedule next. They do go on the road for the next 2 games of the conference schedule. On the 4th, they do play TCU. Then they head on the 7th to Oklahoma State. Both teams lost yesterday in their Big 12 openers. But that doesn't mean that these are easy wins or these are, gimmies. Now, compared to some of the other ones on the schedule, they are on the lighter side. So you really have a good chance at building that momentum up that ladder before you have to ready to come back on home to host at right now, currently ranked number 14 Houston Cougars. You got the Jayhawks coming in a few weeks as well. Actually, you travel to Lawrence for that one. I think you have a really good chance after watching this team on Monday night. If they continue to play the way they just did, there is no reason why they can't start Big 12 play off 3-0. I know. Can you believe that I just said that after what we saw from non-conference play? And now we're talking about there's no reason why this team can't be 3-0 starting conference. It's like they flipped a switch over the holiday break, that little small holiday break. And whatever it was, it's working. If Dug McDaniel had this opportunity and played with this type of momentum in the non-conference play, with that type of motor, I went out on a limb on social media and said it during the game. This team is 9-2 if they get point guard play like that from Dug McDaniel. I think they still lose games like LSU, and maybe you throw in the St. John's game in there. And I think you're 9-2 if you get that good play from the point guard position like you did on Monday night. But instead they're 7-5, but they're 1-0 in Big 12 play. How many wins are they going to need to get into the NCAA tournament? Is 10-10 enough with that non-conference schedule? Probably not. 11-9 might be iffy. I think you can call it a shoe-in. Maybe not even on the bubble. Maybe you might even sneak in above the bubble if you're 13-7. Is that doable? Is 13-7 doable? That's tough. I think 12-8, 11-9 is probably the best goal to search for in this conference. And if you can get to there, I think you have a strong opportunity to find yourself in the first 4 and get yourself on the bubble. And right now, after having that non-conference schedule, I think that's a great goal to push forward to. But what can still be done to improve this squad? Because as I mentioned heading into this segment, as soon as you relax, another ranked team comes into town, or you have to head on the road to head against a ranked opponent. There's so many ranked opponents in the best conference in college athletics. There, I said it, not even just basketball, right? You saw what they're doing in the bowl games. I know I got a couple comments saying that what I said about the Big 12 is not the best conference. I'm going to go ahead and counter it back on you and check yourself. Big 12 is the best conference in college athletics, but especially on the college basketball level. Thank you, by the way, for leaving your comments. I really appreciate that. Although I think I got 3 things that they can improve, and they're going to be compared to the Cincinnati game. First, we're going to start off, although this was the best 40 minutes that they've played all season, and I'm not afraid to continue to say that over and over again because we've stressed that. And the biggest one you can go back to is the St. John's game. They had a good taste of it, what this team could be, but they struggled in the second half. We did not see that for the 40 minutes of play. Number 1, I think the rebounding game needs to improve a little bit. Obviously, it might be tough. They probably won't win the rebounding game against a lot of these Big 12 opponents, but I think you have to put in an effort in practice and in your game plans to improve that a little more. The defensive rebounds will come, but I think you have to push a little bit more on crashing the boards on the offensive side. If you're going to continue to be aggressive with this pace and work on your second chance points, you got to find a way to be in better position to pick up offensive rebounds so you can make sure those second chance opportunities come around and you're not wasting a possession when only taking a few seconds off the shot clock. Although I love the fact that they're being aggressive with the shot clock, with the play possession, if you're not utilizing second chance points, because you don't make every bucket. You usually make, if you get 50% from the field goal range overall, from the field, if you get 50%, that's a good night, right? So you have to utilize those second chance points. If you're not doing that, then this aggressive nature in the offense is kind of just a waste, and you're giving more possessions to their team and control the pace themselves. So I think rebounding has to improve slightly. That's where I'm at with number one, what they can still improve. I'm going to go with number two here, and this might be a weird moment for me to say this after I've talked about how great of point guard play we've seen from Dug McDaniel, but I think that the point guard play, it has drastically improved. There's no doubt about that, but Dug did have 6 turnovers, and that just needs a little bit of housework. Notice that both these things are just tweaks, right? Let's find some way to get in some better positioning for rebounding. How can we do that? Work some tape, have the coaches work some things, whatever the case may be. Turnovers, obviously, turnovers are going to happen. There's 11 in this game. 6 of them did come from McDaniel, though. He is facilitating most of it. It makes sense that he had most of the turnovers. How do you find ways to limit that? Now that he's got a high motor, maybe shows a little bit more confidence in practice and can move that and translate that onto the court for the rest of this Big 12 conference. And finally, I want to talk about, and although I talked about how this is the best 40 minutes of basketball they've played, doesn't mean it's going to be or could be the only 40 minutes of best basketball they play all season long. The first 4 minutes were still a little stagnant from this team. And that's something that we have seen multiple times this season where they've started off slow. Now, luckily for Kansas State, Cincinnati also started off slow, and it helped the Wildcats get up to, I believe, a 9-3 start to the game. However, if they would have been a little bit more aggressive like they were in the second half, made those right adjustments, and played to that type of energy to begin the game, that 9-3 probably would have been more like 17-5 or 17-3. And that's a crazy run that I just stated. But if they can utilize the first 4 minutes with a little high motor, little higher engine, I think that this team not only can start the Big 12 conference play 3-0, but I think they go into a Houston Cougars. They bring Houston in, they come into Manhattan, and I think they can run with them without a problem. I really do with this. And I know that I'm a very optimistic right now after what I saw in this Cincinnati game. But when I tried my best to think about what can still be improved, the only things I could think of were some small tweaks like that. That means they played some good basketball, and I'm really excited for what they can see and what they can do against TCU in Oklahoma State. Enjoy your new year. We'll be back here with a brand new episode in 2025. We're going to break down why I think Kansas State athletics is going to be, why they're going to have a great year next year. But until then, we'll see you back here for another episode of Locked On Kansas State.